A 48-year-old black CEO, a woman of quiet power, stepped into her own lavish hotel and was met with a simple, cutting phrase. "We're full. Guests only." She didn't raise her voice. She simply made a single phone call, and the world inside those walls began to pivot on its axis. She hadn't wanted a grand entrance, no welcoming committee, no crimson carpet unfurled for her arrival. All she desired was a key, a soft bed, and a moment of peace to center herself before a critical board meeting. She wasn't even supposed to be there in person, but when Corinne Dubois glided through the gleaming, revolving doors of the Meridian Grand in Summit Creek, the universe had other plans. She moved with an effortless grace, a confidence that didn't need to announce itself. Her supple leather loafers made no sound on the marble. Her impeccably tailored trousers were elegant but not ostentatious, and her blouse, a muted shade of cerulean silk, was pristine yet understated. A simple canvas duffel was slung over her shoulder. She had no assistant, no entourage. She could have been any traveler, or perhaps someone aspiring to be one. Behind the polished mahogany of the front desk, a young receptionist idly chewed the end of her pen, her acrylic nails making a soft, rhythmic tapping against the keyboard. She looked up, her lips forming a practiced smile, the kind reserved for those you are about to gently turn away. "Checking in," Corinne offered, her own smile unwavering and polite. "Yes, under Dubois. Corinne Dubois." The girl's fingers danced across the keys, then abruptly halted. She blinked, her lips pursing into a thin line. I'm not seeing any reservation under that name." "That's quite all right," Corinne replied smoothly. "There is a suite that is always kept open for me." The receptionist's tone sharpened almost imperceptibly. "Ma'am, we are actually at full capacity this evening. You would need a confirmed booking to stay with us." "For guests only." Corinne's smile did not falter, but a palpable weight settled into the air around them. Her gaze drifted past the young woman to the polished gold plaque mounted behind her. The Meridian Grand, a Dubois property. Her name wasn't just on a reservation list. It was etched into the very foundation of the building. "I am a guest," she stated, her voice low but clear. "And more than that, I own this hotel." The girl blinked again, momentarily stunned, as if Corinne had just declared herself the reigning monarch of a distant land. Then a skeptical smirk twisted the corner of her mouth. "You own the Meridian?" Corinne simply nodded, her calm unshaken. The receptionist reached for the desk phone. "I'm going to have to call the manager." "Please go ahead." Across the expansive lobby, a couple dressed in golf shirts glanced over, their curiosity piqued. A man seated by the grand fireplace tilted his head, listening. Corinne could feel it. That familiar, heavy shift in perception. The silent accusation that someone must be fabricating a story, and the unspoken consensus on who that person was. Moments later, a wiry man with a crooked tie and a clipboard emerged from a side office. His name badge read, "Assistant Manager Gareth Adler." He took one look at Corinne, a glance that catalogued her from head to toe, and immediately began speaking with a forced, hollow cheerfulness. "Good evening. Is there an issue with your reservation?" "She claims to own the hotel," the receptionist announced, her voice a little too loud, a little too triumphant. Gareth faltered. Corinne held his gaze, her own steady and direct. "I don't claim, I do. My name is Corinne Dubois. You will find it on every quarterly report and on every executive board memorandum. I am here for a single night. You should have a suite held under the owner's block." Gareth nervously adjusted his glasses. "Right. Just allow me one moment, please." He turned toward a back office, his voice a low mutter into his walkie-talkie. Corinne stood perfectly still. She didn't fidget. She didn't check her watch. She didn't raise her voice. But the air in the lobby was growing thick with unspoken tension. That's when security materialized. They weren't aggressive, not yet, but their presence was a clear statement. One positioned himself near the elevators, the other by the coffee bar, just in case. Corinne's gaze never wavered. She didn't flinch, but deep inside, she felt it. That quiet fire igniting in her chest. It wasn't just because they failed to recognize her. It was because, once again, they had decided she didn't belong. She could have produced her identification. She could have displayed emails, ownership documents, photographs from the ribbon-cutting ceremony 7 years prior. But instead, she took a small step back, drew her phone from her pocket, and made one call. It was all that was required. She knew with a weary certainty that this was about more than just a room. It was about something far deeper, and the people assembled in this lobby were about to learn that lesson the hard way. Corinne didn't pace the floor. She didn't let out an exasperated sigh or start recording the incident, as some might have in her position. She simply stood near a marble pillar, phone still in her hand, quietly waiting. The call had lasted a mere 26 seconds. She hadn't needed to elaborate. She hadn't even elevated the tone of her voice. She had simply stated her location, her name, and the words, "I've been denied access to my own property. I need this resolved immediately." And then she waited. At the front desk, the receptionist, Maya, continued to type, her fingers clicking away as if the screen held a secret that could rewrite the truth. Gareth, the assistant manager, reappeared with a folder, his expression now laced with anxiety. Seeing Corinne still standing there, a picture of calm, he adopted a new, more conciliatory tone. "Ms. Dubois," he said, putting a careful emphasis on her name this time, "I believe there's been some sort of mix-up. We just need to verify—" Corinne cut him off, her voice gentle but firm. "You can verify all you wish. I am not moving." Gareth's eyes darted past her to the security guard, who remained as motionless as a statue. The staff was locked in a silent standoff, caught between the fear of escalating the situation and the peril of offering an apology. Neither path felt safe. She noticed the onlookers, 3 women near the window whispering behind cupped hands, a young man with his laptop half open, feigning work while absorbing every detail. The doorman had ceased greeting new arrivals, and then she saw it. The receptionist, Maya, surreptitiously checking her phone beneath the counter, scrolling, searching, likely Googling her name and expecting to find nothing. The irony would have been amusing if the situation weren't so painfully familiar. It always unfolded in the same way. People had a fixed image of what power looked like, what leadership sounded like, what ownership wore. And someone like her, a woman with brown skin, her textured hair styled in a sophisticated puff, carrying no designer handbag, wearing no flashy jewelry, she simply didn't fit their preconceived picture. So they questioned it. That was the part that stung. Not the denial itself, but the fact that it was no longer a surprise. Her mind drifted to another hotel lobby, years ago in Port Haven. She was 28, a newly appointed VP, wearing heels that gave her blisters, and a suit 2 sizes too large because it was all she could afford. Security had shadowed her from the moment she entered. The only thing that had saved her from further humiliation was the CFO descending to greet her personally. She had never forgotten that day, and here she was, 2 decades later, still having to prove her identity inside a building that bore her name on its legal documents. She let out a soft sigh, her eyes sweeping the room. No apology was forthcoming, no correction offered. There was only the ticking of the lobby clock and the strained effort of people trying not to stare too obviously. And then the elevator chimed. 2 men in sharply tailored suits stepped out, one holding a clipboard, the other a company-branded fleece. They were not hotel staff. They moved with an unmistakable sense of purpose. Corinne recognized them instantly. Regional Vice President Donovan Reed and District Manager Mateo Vega. Now it was their faces that betrayed a flicker of raw panic. Donovan approached at a brisk pace, giving Gareth a dismissive nod without breaking stride. "Ms. Dubois, we are so profoundly sorry. I just received the call." Mateo followed, slightly breathless. "We are handling this immediately." Gareth began to speak, but Donovan silenced him with a single, sharp look. The receptionist, Maya, froze, her eyes wide with dawning comprehension. Her face drained of color as she slowly, almost imperceptibly, took a step back from the desk. "Suite 2000 has been cleared," Mateo said, consulting his tablet. "Your driver is being rerouted to take you wherever you need to go in the morning. Your usual fruit platter and espresso order will be waiting for you." Corinne offered the slightest hint of a smile. "Thank you." But she wasn't finished. She wanted to watch, to see how each of them responded now that they knew. She wanted to observe how their tone would shift, how their posture would change. She wanted to witness the mechanics of power as it finally made its presence known in the room. Because it is one thing to be disrespected when people are ignorant of who you are, but it is something else entirely when they know, and they choose to do it anyway. Mateo pulled Gareth aside, his voice a low, furious whisper. Donovan was already on his phone, speaking in clipped, precise phrases about HR, protocol, and service misconduct. The tension that had been directed at Corinne was now turning inward, ricocheting through the staff like a pinball of pure panic. Corinne didn't gloat. She didn't cross her arms or lift her chin in a gesture of victory. She simply walked back to the front desk, her steps slow and deliberate, and placed her phone on the polished counter. "I will take the 20th floor suite," she said, her voice perfectly even. "The usual setup. Please send someone up to confirm it is clean." The receptionist opened her mouth, but no words came out. Corinne didn't wait for her to find them. She turned to Donovan. "Have I been checked in?" "Just finished," Donovan replied, flipping a page on his clipboard. "You will have 2 key cards and a full incident report by the time you reach the elevator." "Good. And the rest?" He nodded curtly. "We have issued a site-wide notification. The corporate audit team is on standby. All current staff will be required to undergo immediate recertification on guest protocol. Disciplinary actions will commence tonight." Corinne glanced over at the receptionist, who was now nervously chewing the inside of her cheek. Her acrylic nails began their tapping again, but the rhythm had changed. It was no longer careless. It was anxious. "You will speak to her," Corinne stated plainly. Donovan cleared his throat. "Yes, ma'am." "Privately, with HR present?" Mateo looked as if he was about to add something, but Corinne raised a single hand, silencing him. "I will speak to her as well. Not now. After I have rested." She took the key cards, gave a single decisive nod, and walked toward the elevator. Heads turned. Guests whispered. Others watched in silent awe. But no one dared to speak to her directly. The elevator doors slid open. As they closed behind her, Corinne could still see Gareth standing stiffly near the front desk, a sheen of sweat visible on his brow. On the 20th floor, her suite was filled with the faint, calming scent of lemon and eucalyptus. The fruit platter was there, as promised. Espresso pods were neatly stacked beside the machine. A handwritten card with her initials sat on the table, though its hurried script betrayed the panic in which it was written. She moved through the expansive room slowly, as if inspecting it not just for cleanliness, but for attitude, for intention, for some proof that somewhere, someone still cared about the experience she had once meticulously built with her own hands. Because this hotel was not just a business. It was her story. She remembered being 33, pitching her vision to a bank in Northridge that didn't believe a woman like her could pull it off. They had barely listened, offering her brutal loan terms and practically daring her to succeed. She did. And now, nearly 2 decades later, standing in one of her signature penthouse suites, she was still fighting to prove it. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her assistant. "Everything is in motion. Let me know if you want a media statement prepared." Corinne paused. She could have easily made this a public spectacle. One social media post and the story would have gone viral. One interview and the headlines would have written themselves. But she wasn't interested in headlines tonight. This wasn't about rage. It wasn't about revenge. It was about respect, and the deeply flawed way it was so often tied to assumptions instead of reality. She sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, her hands folded in her lap, enveloped in silence. Outside, the city was alive, the hum of traffic on Majesty Boulevard, the distant horn of a freight train from the industrial zone. But inside the suite, the quiet was heavy. Then a soft knock at the door. Room service. A young man brought in a fresh espresso, a note of apology from the kitchen manager, and an offer to send a massage therapist on the house. Corinne thanked him softly and closed the door. She sat back down, took a slow, deliberate sip of the dark espresso, and gazed out the window at the constellation of lights flickering across the city. She could feel a shift beginning, not just within the walls of this hotel, but within herself. Something was about to change. At precisely 6:30 a.m., Corinne Dubois descended in the elevator, but this time she was not a guest. She was the CEO. Her suit was a crisp, deep charcoal worn with a clean ivory blouse. Her heels echoed with purpose on the marble floor, and there was a quiet, intense focus in her eyes that no one dared to interrupt. The lobby, just beginning to stir with the morning's first checkouts and coffee runs, seemed to hold its breath as she appeared. Staff members turned, conversations paused, and even the barista behind the corner kiosk stopped mid-pour. Donovan and Mateo were already waiting near the fireplace, holding 3 folders and 2 cups of coffee, neither of which had been touched. They looked like men who had not slept, and they probably hadn't. Corinne gave them a slight nod and headed directly for the small executive conference room just past the concierge desk. Donovan followed, and Mateo fell into step behind him. Inside the room, seated stiffly at the table, were the assistant manager, Gareth, the receptionist, her name tag now clearly reading Maya Soto, and a woman from HR who introduced herself only as Isla from corporate. Her notepad was already open. Corinne did not take a seat. She remained standing at the head of the table, her arms folded. No one spoke. The silence was thick, heavy with anticipation. Then Corinne asked quietly, "Would someone like to explain what happened last night from your perspective?" Maya's gaze immediately dropped to the table. Gareth cleared his throat but seemed unable to form a single word. Corinne waited, letting the silence stretch. Finally, Maya mumbled, I didn't think she was... I didn't expect..." "You didn't expect someone who looks like me to own this building," Corinne finished for her, her voice calm and controlled. Maya nodded, a barely perceptible movement. "Was I rude to you?" Corinne asked. Maya shook her head. "No, ma'am." "Did I raise my voice?" "No." "Did I threaten anyone?" Maya's voice was now a mere whisper. "No." Corinne took a slow, deliberate breath and turned slightly toward Isla. "I don't need this to be a firing squad," she said. "But I do need accountability." Isla nodded. "Understood." Mateo chimed in. "We're prepared to issue a formal write-up and remove her from front desk rotation until recertification is complete. Gareth will be placed on administrative review, pending further interviews." Corinne nodded once, then finally sat down. She turned her attention back to Maya. "How long have you worked here?" 4 months. "And in that time, how often have you thought about who built this hotel? Where it came from?" Maya hesitated. I guess I just assumed it was some big corporation. A group of investors or something." Corinne let the moment hang in the air. "Do you know how many properties I have built across this country?" Maya shook her head. 17, from Havenport to Sunstone. Every single one of them designed with intention. Luxury made accessible. Service made human. I built this brand because I was tired of being treated like a shadow. So tell me, why is it that when I walk into my own lobby, I am still invisible to the very people working under my name?" The question wasn't angry. It was weary, honest, and heavy with the weight of years of experience. Maya looked as though she wanted to melt into her chair. Gareth stared straight ahead, his face a deep shade of red. Mateo spoke again. "We have already drafted a memo that will be sent to every Dubois property today. Mandatory, staff-wide inclusivity training. A complete reset. No exceptions." Corinne looked at him. "Make sure it is not just another box to check. I don't want people memorizing scripts. I want them to understand what respect actually looks like when you think no one important is watching." Donovan finally spoke. "We will make it real." She stood again. The meeting was over. As she walked out of the conference room, the lobby seemed to physically straighten itself. Staff members scrambled to look busy, some nodding nervously in her direction, but she didn't acknowledge them. Not yet. She was not interested in performance. She was looking for genuine change. But before she left the hotel, there was one more conversation she needed to have, and it had nothing to do with corporate policy. Corinne waited until the morning rush had subsided. She allowed time to pass, not for dramatic effect, but so that no one could hide behind the shield of distraction. No ringing phones, no feigned smiles for incoming guests. Just stillness and truth. She found Maya Soto in the staff lounge behind the coffee bar, seated alone at a small table with a half-eaten blueberry muffin in front of her. Her phone was face down. She looked as though she hadn't slept either. Corinne didn't send someone to summon her. She walked in herself. Maya shot up from her chair, nearly knocking over her drink. "Relax," Corinne said, pulling out the chair across from her. "I just want to talk." Maya swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." "Drop the ma'am," Corinne replied gently. "This is not a hearing." Maya nodded, her eyes fixed on the table. They sat for a moment in silence, the low hum of the refrigerator and the buzz of the overhead lights filling the space between them. Then Corinne spoke. "Have you ever worked in a place where you felt small?" Maya blinked, looking up in surprise. "Yeah, most of the time." "Tell me." Maya hesitated, then gave a small shrug. "I worked at a diner out by Route 95 for a year. Wore a paper hat, got yelled at by the cooks every single shift. Some customers never left a tip. Some called me kid even though I was 27. I felt invisible most days." Corinne leaned back slightly. "So you know what it feels like to be ignored." Maya nodded. "Yes." "Then help me understand," Corinne said, her tone never rising. "How you looked me directly in the eye last night and decided I did not belong here." The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with guilt, with realization, with something finally clicking into place. Maya's voice was rough with emotion. "I don't know. I didn't mean to. When you walked in, I thought maybe you were lost or waiting for someone else. You didn't look like—" She stopped herself. "Didn't look like what?" Maya shook her head, unable to finish. "Like the kind of person who owns hotels." Corinne didn't flinch. "And what does that kind of person look like?" Maya had no answer. "That is the real problem," Corinne said softly. "People have a picture in their heads. Probably male, probably older, well-dressed, and almost certainly not me. That picture doesn't just live in your head. It affects your decisions. It shapes your behavior." "I'm sorry," Maya said quietly. "Really? I know that's not enough, but I am." Corinne nodded slowly. "It's a start. But I am not here for an apology. I came here because I wanted you to see me, not just as your boss, not as a cautionary tale. As a person." Maya looked confused. "I was you once," Corinne continued. "I started as a receptionist. I was mistaken for a janitor more times than I can count. I had people call me sweetheart and honey, as if I wasn't the one keeping the entire operation running. Every single time I had to decide whether to fight back or let it go. And when I finally made it into the boardroom, I told myself I would build places where people like you could grow." Maya's eyes were wide with disbelief. "You really started as a receptionist?" A faint smile touched Corinne's lips. "In Capital City. My first boss told me I sounded too educated to be on the phones and moved me to the night audit. That was the beginning." Maya almost laughed. "That's unreal." "It shouldn't be," Corinne said. "It should be normal." She stood up. "I don't need you to be perfect, but I do need you to be aware. Every guest who walks through that door, old, young, dressed up or dressed down, deserves to be treated with dignity. Start there, and you will never have to recover from moments like last night again." Maya stood as well. "Thank you for talking to me. I mean that." Corinne nodded once and left her standing there. But as she walked back through the lounge door, something inside her felt lighter, because the message had finally landed, right where it needed to. By mid-morning, the rhythm of the Meridian Grand had returned, at least on the surface. Guests wheeled their luggage across the polished tile floors, coffee cups clinked gently at the bar, and a small family inquired about nearby attractions. The world moved on, as it always does. But inside the management office, the atmosphere was different. Donovan stood by the window, watching the valet service rotate cars in front of the main entrance. Matteo typed quietly at his laptop, drafting the official internal memo. Isla, the HR lead, reviewed new onboarding modules with a stony focus. And at the center of it all, Corinne read through a fresh stack of evaluations and personnel files that had been flagged for review. She wasn't angry. She was precise. "I am not here to punish," she said aloud, scanning a report. "I am here to prevent repetition." Matteo looked up. "We are adjusting our interview process for all front desk hires. We will be testing not just for skill, but for empathy, pattern recognition, and bias evaluation." "Good," Corinne replied. She tapped her pen once on the desk. and put me on the rotation. Starting next quarter, I will show up at random properties quietly, just as I did here." Donovan raised an eyebrow. "You want to be— what? A secret guest?" "Not secret," she corrected. "Just anonymous, until I'm not." A small grin touched Mateo's lips. "That is going to make a lot of people very nervous." "Good," she said. "Let them sit with that feeling. The real version of this job does not come with advance warnings." She stood, slipping the papers into a folder. "Have the new training modules go live by next Friday. Include story-based modules. I want the staff reading about actual experiences from our guests, not memorizing fake scripts. I want real words, human ones." Donovan nodded. "Consider it done." Corinne left the office and walked back into the main lobby. She paused near the reception desk, where a new agent had taken over. He smiled at her immediately, respectfully, like someone who understood she was not just another suit passing by. She returned the nod, then scanned the room. Everything appeared calm on the outside, but she could feel it. Small cracks forming in old ingrained habits. And that is how real change begins. Not with a press release, not with a public apology, but with quiet, consistent corrections, repeated until they become the new standard. She made her way to the elevator, heading back upstairs to retrieve her belongings. Her flight wasn't until late afternoon. There was still time. When the doors opened on the 20th floor, she stepped out, her heels soft against the plush carpet. The hallway smelled faintly of fresh linens and lemon. The door to her suite stood slightly ajar. Housekeeping must have just finished. Inside, her bag was packed and neatly zipped. Her laptop rested on the desk, its charger perfectly coiled beside it. Everything was in order except for one thing. A folded note was sitting on the nightstand. She opened it. "Ms. Dubois, thank you for your grace. I will be better. Maya." It wasn't written on fancy stationery, just lined notepad paper in careful, deliberate handwriting. But it meant more to her than any pre-written, corporate-approved apology ever could. Corinne folded it once and slipped it into her purse. Downstairs, a car was waiting. As she exited through the lobby, the same doorman from the previous night held the door open for her with purpose. "Safe travels, Ms. Dubois," he said warmly. "We hope to see you again very soon." She smiled. "You will." As the car pulled away from the curb, she did not look back. She didn't need to, because she had left something behind, something far heavier than luggage. She had left the weight of being misjudged, the quiet ache of having to constantly explain her own worth. And what had replaced it was something better: understanding, discomfort, and growth. For them, and perhaps even for herself. But there was still one last thing she wanted to say. Just not to the hotel or its staff. This message was meant for anyone who had ever had to stand in a room and prove that they belonged there. The ride to the airport was quiet. There was no small talk from the driver, no music playing on the radio, just the soft whir of tires on pavement and the occasional blink of a turn signal. Corinne sat in the back seat, one hand resting on her purse, the other holding the folded note from Maya. She hadn't read it again, but its presence was there, like a small piece of proof that the previous night had not been for nothing. She stared out the window at the rows of brick buildings, the corner gas stations, the faded signs for mechanics and bakeries. This was not where she had planned to be this week, and yet perhaps she was meant to be here all along. Not for the board meeting, not for the business, but for the conversation. Because the truth is, this kind of thing no longer shocked her. She wasn't angry that it had happened. She was tired that it kept happening. Tired of how often a person's worth is measured by assumptions. Tired of how quickly people sort you into categories without asking a single question. Tired of being made to explain the things she should never have to say aloud. Yes, this is mine. Yes, I built it. Yes, I deserve to be here. And yet, she was not bitter. That is the part that people often misunderstand. Corinne didn't carry bitterness. She carried memory. And memory can be a powerful tool if you use it correctly. As the airport signs came into view, she thought about her younger self again. That girl working night shifts in cheap flats and stiff uniforms, with no makeup and no recognition. Just drive. Just the unwavering belief that someday she would build something that no one could take away from her. She had done that. But buildings were not enough. Because even with 17 properties and a team of executives reporting to her, people still looked at her and saw something else, something less. So what do you do when the world refuses to see you? You make sure you see yourself clearly and without apology. And then you walk in anyway. You hold your ground. You speak your truth plainly. You do not beg for permission. You act as if the door was always yours to open. Corinne stepped out of the car, grabbed her bag, and nodded to the driver. No more words were needed. Inside the terminal, people hurried all around her with their coffee cups and roller bags. Announcements echoed from the ceiling speakers. She moved through the crowd quietly, almost invisible again in the rush of strangers. But in her chest, something had settled. She had taken a moment of humiliation and turned it into a mirror, forcing everyone in that hotel to finally see themselves. And mirrors do not lie. They show you exactly who you really are. She hoped Maya would grow from it. She hoped Gareth would learn from it. She hoped Mateo and Donovan would follow through on every single promise made in that office. But even if they didn't, she would still be standing. She always had been. Because dignity was not something anyone gave to her. It was something she had never, ever given up. And for anyone watching, anyone listening, who had ever been dismissed, doubted, or spoken to as if they did not matter, Corinne had one final thing to say. You do not have to shout to be heard. You just have to know who you are and walk like it every single time. Let them be uncomfortable. Let them learn. Let them wonder how they could have possibly missed it. And when they finally see you, make sure they never forget. If this story made you pause, reflect, or feel something deep in your chest, share it. Leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that speak to truth, power, and the people who refuse to be ignored.